Republican minority view here in Rhode Island tonight.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
You know, in that 10 seconds there where all that little stuff comes up after I say that first thing there, I was thinking to myself, will there ever be in my working lifetime, at least here, the Republican majority view in Rhode Island? Audible, Kev.
From your lips
minority
to
leader.
God's ears.
Usually I put all sorts of stuff out. The Friday shows are loose. Will there ever be a Republican majority view?
Crazier things have happened, Dan.
Can you put them on? Can you put them on? There you go. Welcome.
Happy to be here.
Crazier things have happened.
Crazier things have happened.
See? Even you don't think so. Even you don't think so. All right, go back to
Well,
your spot.
we have a lot of Republicans running as Democrats. If they would just become Republicans, then maybe that would happen.
Say that again?
We have a lot of Republicans who run as Democrats. So if those Democrats became Republicans, maybe if the progressives take over the Democratic Party, those people would become Republicans, and then maybe we could take things over.
Filippi, by the way, is the Republican minority leader, and I just discombobulated the show. You know, on Fridays, come back to this camera here, Kevin, if you would. On Fridays, we just kind of spread it out. You know, we record the shows on Thursday afternoon, so if all hell breaks loose, we'll cover that on Monday. By the way, the Ed Commissioner, Angelica Infante Green, is here on Monday. All right, cut back to the white shot. Very unorthodox start to the show, but you and I get along. The idea that party politics matters in this state, I have long preached on both platforms that they really don't, in a sense, in that the Democratic House is so wide, it is bifurcated right now with a conservative, well, an old, traditional, moderate
Democrats,
bloc.
definitely.
And the progressive movement is just churning away, getting more and more traction. So it's interesting that you say that there are Republicans who run as Democrats, meaning there are people who have, if you line people up on the ideological spectrum, they'd be more conservative fiscally, mostly fiscally.
Socially, too.
Socially.
You have a lot of pro-life, pro-Second Amendment Democrats.
The old-fashioned Democrat, the old-fashioned, like my mother, the old-fashioned Kennedy-loving Catholic pro-life Democrat type of thing, right? Yeah.
And if you look at what's happened nationally with the Democrats, it seems like Rhode Island is the holdout. It seems that in most other states and nationally, the Democratic Party has lurched far to the left. And is that a trend that will happen here? I don't know.
Well, speaking of politics and party and all that kind of stuff, do you think the turbulence in Washington right now is going to be impactful at all on the 2020 legislative races for you?
It may be. It may be.
You don't say much, and Sue Cienki, your party chairman, is aggressive in avoiding. Almost suggests that she has no responsibility nor interest in even commenting on President Trump and the turmoil that he's in day in, day out.
The comment I'll offer is I think that both parties don't have largely Americans' best interests at heart. They're focused on fighting with each other and acquiring power. Nationally.
So the Rhode Island Republican brand is different?
Definitely.
In what sense?
Is that I think we're more libertarian. I think that we're socially cool and fiscally responsible. We don't want government in your home, but we also want government managing money responsibly. And I don't see that much from the National Party. I see the National Party having $1 trillion deficits and worrying about what people do with their private lives. And that's not what many members of the state party preach.
So you've come on as a, I've said this before, and I think it to be true, as a really credible voice on the Republican side, and that always means that people will say, hey, what are you going to do? Hey, what are you going to do, right? Statewide, you're going to do statewide. Hey, what are you going to do? If you were planning on a statewide run as a Republican right now in this space and time, now, a gubernatorial race is two elections away anyway, 3 years, right? But if you were planning on that, would you take ownership of Donald Trump right now? Would you feel the need to do that?
When you say take ownership, you mean define a position?
Yeah.
Would I do that?
Or do you think you could escape the conversation?
I think that in many respects it's not productive to get brought down into the gutter with national politics, because there's such important things going on in this state.
I can't believe you say that. In the gutter with national politics. This is the thing that drives me crazy. In the same sense that you don't want to be minimized and shouldn't be by being a politician. I said this yesterday when the the Wednesday for you guys, Kat Kerwin,
Yeah.
the Democratic 22-year-old counselor who decides to make a statement and a stand that painting, vandalizing the Columbus Day statue is a legitimate thing, right? And I said yesterday in reaction to it, rather than tackling her head on that, there is a real dearth of political acumen and skill right now, and one of the reasons that we've come to a place where it's a race to the bottom in terms of intellect is that the fields are just too thin. And one of the reasons that I think has happened over time is that we've decided to minimize politics. We call it a dirty word. We suggest that it is, it's disgusting, I don't want to be around it. The politicians, when somebody says, hey, yeah, I'm running for office, people say, what's wrong with that person? As opposed to, hey, isn't that terrific?
That's great.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
So I'm sure you have felt some of that before.
I have.
Well, then why would you transfer that same kind of review to the national scene? I mean, it's tumultuous now, no doubt.
Let me respond, because if you want to have a policy discussion about national politics, I'd love to. But it seems the only time people want to talk about national politics is the gotcha chess game. And if I give a long speech about
should we be in northern Syria? Yes or no? I mean, should we have stayed in northern Syria? Yes or no?
No, we shouldn't have gone there in the first place.
Okay, that's irrelevant. That's not relevant to the decision to pull out 60 troops, which opened up the doorway to Erdogan, right? So should that have happened? Quick answer. Yes, it should have. You think the president did the right thing?
I think that maybe he should have did it differently, but
what does differently mean?
I think his rhetoric is repulsive.
No, the action of taking those troops out left Erdogan a green light to go in and roll the Kurds.
My response is, how long do we stay in? When do we get out? There's no good time to leave the Middle East, Dan.
Okay, so time out. We could go to the bar and have a good conversation about it. My point is, that's not gotcha. That's policy debate that you and I are having.
Oh, I will do that all day long. But I feel that when people want to speak about Trump, it's like, do you like Trump? Has Trump said the right thing? What do you think about Trump?
Because we've minimized the game to that.
No, but everything about national politics is the game. It's not like smart policy-based discussions. Every time people talk about national politics, it's like...
And there's no game on Smith Hill?
There is a game on Smith Hill, but that's the game I'm playing in. So I'll talk about that game all day long.
That's my point, that the games are almost the same on both levels.
They're not the same. They're not the same. In this state, every time I come on, we talk about substantive policy issues, statewide. You don't ask me really about, what did Raimondo think about Matteo? What does Matteo think about Raimondo?
It's it has an impact on things.
I know, but we rarely do that. We always engage in substantive policy debates. But anytime someone wants to speak to me about the national stuff, it's not about policy. It's about the chess game, the gotcha chess game. And I feel when I do engage in that, it distracts from the important policy discussions that we need to have about your backyard stuff here in Rhode Island. So I'll talk national politics all day long, but let's focus on policy. If you want my opinion on Trump, I'll offer it, just don't make it the headline. He needs to chill out. He needs to get off Twitter, and he needs to have better people writing letters to foreign leaders.
All right, then. Well, that was a pregame show. When we come back, we'll start the show. Stay with us.
This is military-grade security. You're issuing a ticket to somebody that could be a bearer bond for $1 billion with the way lotteries are running right now. It has to be perfect. We've made our reputation and grown this company by providing the integrity and security that lotteries need to do this. If you're going to go out to bid and say, oh, we can do that too, and raise your hand and say, well, we'll bring in people to do that, I just think you first should look at and say, what's wrong with the system we have now, extending what we have now, keeping the economic development benefits that we get from that agreement, and making sure at the same time that it's a market-driven agreement for the state.
A month ago, that's Bob Vincent, chairman of IGT, talking about why Twin Rivers' game plan to sub out with a company called Camelot and then maybe a company called Intralot, the operations of the floor and the lottery. This headline is quite interesting. Rhode Island Republicans call for an independent study. That would be Mr. Filippi here, because trying to figure out both sides of the aisle very difficult, right? Including Mr. Christofuli from Twin River, who was here last week.
They run 13 states in the United States. 13. Okay, they're not a fly-by-night operation. 5 times they've converted an IGT system to an intralot system. Okay, 5. They're all fine. Illinois, where IGT got bounced because they couldn't meet the performance standards, Camelot and Intralot came in. Illinois is 12 times the size of the Rhode Island Lottery. It's running beautifully. It happened very recently, and it is far exceeding the performance of IGT. This is why you run a bid process, to determine the qualifications. Intralot has 5,200 people around the globe, and they run 13 states. I think these concerns are a little bit exaggerated.
So that is Mark Christofuli, who is the newest boss over there at Twin River on the scene. You put out a release last week, which I thought was constructive. You're asking the General Assembly to hire consultants to try to figure this whole thing out, which is, you know, somewhat non-traditional in the sense that you expect that vetting and diligence to be done by the administration, right? But
we're a separate branch of government. I think we have to amend our general laws to allow this proposed contract to happen. I think we need our own consultant advising us. It's done all over the country with these types of contracts. In Ohio, they actually hired an independent consultant to work with the administration to get the best deal. None of us in the General Assembly are technology contractors, and to my knowledge, no one in the administration is a technology contractor. IGT is a technology contractor. They do this every day. And we need someone who's as well versed on our side, advising us about what are clearly different factual representations from the administration, IGT, and Twin River.
you had suggested last week that taking Alan Hessenfeld's offer to pay for such a study and taking him up on that, I vehemently disagree with that aspect of your thing. It was later pointed out to me by Bill Fisher, spokesman for IGT, that Mr. Hassenfeld, through his relationship with Hasbro, has long had a relationship with one of the companies that would be in the game, so to speak, in the technology world for this. And it's a limited market. Well, it's a huge market with limited players, right? You still holding on to the idea that you'd like him to do pro bono work here or to fund the General Assembly's work on this?
I think I said on your radio show, the ideal path forward is to have the General Assembly fund it. If the General Assembly doesn't fund it, I think that we can ask Mr. Hassenfeld to get involved and do everything we can to put up a firewall. It's better to get some information than have no information.
The firewall means his relationship to the actual analysis.
It's done in business all the time. It really is. You put up walls, you have funding, you separate it. It's done in law firms all the time. But we agree the General Assembly should pay for it.
If it's important enough to do on behalf of the taxpayers should pay for it.
And we've been having those conversations. There's no decision yet, but we are.
Who we?
Myself and Democratic leadership.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
So you're making progress on this?
There's been progress, definitely.
Over the last week or so?
Yes.
Are we heading toward a fall pre-holiday season exercise here, or is it something that would be voted on and funded in January?
Potentially. It doesn't have to be voted on. JCLS has a pot of money for these types of things.
JCLS has a big pot of money.
Joint Committee on Legislative Services.
Thank you. Nobody knows what the GCLS is, other than I can tell you that part of it is it funds the so famous program that we talk about, which is the legislative grant funding out there, which is disgraceful in my mind.
And I thank you for recognizing that most Republicans, and in the past you've recognized this, don't participate in the legislative grant program.
Yes, because it is a, well, it's just, the currency is just too obvious in terms of what politicians, elected officials will do in order to be able to get $5,000 for the local Little League and run the playbook of the speaker in order to get that cheesy little check in the weekly newspaper. In the meantime, the GCLS is this governing entity and funding entity that coordinates state government, or the General Assembly, and has members from both sides. You sit on the GCLS as a minority member.
And you
Good.
need
So
and you
can-
need a
can-
JCLS funded. Like the legislature needs to handle its own budget
Right.
for
So,
separation
well,
of
by the
powers
way,
issues.
brilliant on your part, which only buoys, I think, the idea that you don't need to ask anybody to fund it because that line item is flowing with excess dough, right?
The money needs to be there for things like this. The General Assembly needs to be
I
able
agree
to do
completely.
things like this.
And
So
do you-
the money's there.
Do you feel like you're any closer, notwithstanding the legitimate concern and need for a consultancy to the General Assembly for this? Do you feel like over time, even in the last week or so, you've come any closer to an understanding of what is the best thing to do here? You still hell bent on a bidding process?
No, I'm not hell-bent on a bidding process. This analysis right here that we're asking for would analyze the two proposals that are before us. Do I think seeking more alternative proposals is the right idea? Yes. They've done it in other states. I've done a lot of research on Ohio recently. That's what they did. They hired an independent consultant, brought in all the industry leaders, and really found the best deal for the state. I think that
Unique to this, though, is that IGT is housed here.
Yes.
IGT has 1,000 jobs here, and IGT is promising 1,100 jobs in perpetuity for the most part. You know, Twin River says IGT is 300 million over 10 years or 20 years, 10 years fat in what they charge. It's an economic development deal that Don Cacciari, old-fashioned great Republican, did for the state of Rhode Island, and it makes the complication and the analysis more difficult,
yeah,
doesn't it?
it really does make it more difficult. And I think in order to determine whether we do the deal with IGT is we need to determine what that job subsidy is. And I feel the only way to determine what that job subsidy is to seek a real in-depth independent analysis or the more simpler seeking competitive proposals. Listen, I want those IGT jobs to stay. Everybody does. But at what cost? There comes a point where the cost we're paying above the market services doesn't justify that. If it's $500 million, does it justify it?
I find that analysis to be interesting in the sense that if their contract wasn't due, and say we were in the middle of it, you wouldn't be waking up in the morning saying, hey, listen, the IGT deal's too fat. Meaning the whole deal has run its 16-year course toward 20. And by the way, you should know that deal is still around until 2023 because it was etched in 2003.
Yeah.
It's not like you've come with a lot of your fiscal watchdoginess that you've shown over the course of time. It's not like you woke up one morning and said, hey, by the way, that IGT deal, it's really fat.
What are we going to? We believe in
So the idea of going forward with something similar to it is a financial mistake, blah, blah, blah. That, too, I think, needs to be evaluated.
So in this country, we believe in sanctity of contract, Dan. I'm not going to come in and try and somehow void a contract that we entered into. Who would enter into contracts with us again in the future if we try and play
I don't
that
think
game?
anybody's suggesting that. So this is a going forward from 2023 decision that has to be made.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, what am I going to do? 3 years ago, when there's still 6 years left on the contract, like, what could I have done?
But what I'm saying is, if I haven't, over the 16 years that the contract has existed, I haven't heard one word boo from anybody on either side of the aisle that it was too fat.
Well, you've also had changing market conditions over the past 20 years. The market has changed. You have more players. Prices have gone down. I mean, that's just what happens when there's more competition. And there's more competition now, and the marketplace has changed.
The bottom line here is I think this is another void of leadership by the governor. Because after having intensive conversations with both parties, it seems to me that all you had to do really was lock them in a room together with a bunch of pizzas and a case of beer and say, don't come out, I'll get your porta potty. Don't come out until you're done, and I'll decide if I like what you did. She can't, she couldn't do it with Paw Sox. I don't know what she's doing with Hasbro. God knows what the Pawtucket development is, although I'm hearing that there's some neat things that might be coming in Pawtucket that she's had nothing to do with. I think that void of leadership is hurting the state. Maybe why she's at 36%. We got a headline right now on the national poll. They question the legitimacy of it. The Morning Consult poll that she's the lowest popular governor in the country. In addition to the analysis that you're looking for, I think she needs to go in there and have these two come out, because if they came out together and said, listen, we all agree on what roles we ought to play and what cut we all ought to have, you guys would say, okay.
I don't know. A lot of issues have been raised, Dan, which I think are
Like?
control of the floor, the mix of slot machines.
Well, that's what those two parties would be agreeing to, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, they'd be agreeing to it, but is that the best thing for the state? Massachusetts has, a third Scientific Games, third IGT. You know, after learning everything I've learned, I wouldn't want any one company to have too much control over that floor. We need competition
No, but
for the
there's
best
no-
machines.
But Twin Rivers' point is that IGT has too much control.
Has
So-
too much control
and
now.
So if they end up with an agreement, there'll be some divvy.
Yeah, but there'll be some divvy, but now...
Twin River is looking for that kind of bifurcated strategic strategy themselves. So if they were able to agree to something that was more formidable, it probably would take care of itself.
But the implication in your comment was that we'd be a rubber stamp for that. I don't think we can be a rubber stamp. I think that it's incumbent upon the General Assembly to get the best deal for the state of Rhode Island. This proper mix of machines, I went to Foxwoods last weekend to walk around and check it out, because I'm in South County. You should see the difference between the Aristocrat machines and the IGT machines and some of the older machines. We need to get the best machines on our floor. We don't have them now. And we need to make sure we have competition. And so if Twin River and IGT come together and make some agreement or have a accord that we think is not in the best interest of the state, I don't care. If they agree, we need to find what's going to maximize revenues.
All right. Mood at the General Assembly. They're not working every day right now, but a little bit of a tension convention next. Yeah, so I don't know if the speaker has problems or not, but I think in the next couple of weeks we're going to find out. Target 12 learned that there was a grand jury that's been assembled back for 2016, a close election drama on a couple of $1,000s of currency, but more importantly, you know, a strategy that was in play where, you know, a fledgling Republican candidate threw her support to the speaker and didn't have any money to do so, and all of a sudden came up with a couple $1,000s to put out a mailer. Right now it looks as if this is low and middle level type of grand jury participation. What is the chatter on Smith Hill about this, and is it going to affect the new session at all if there's no resolve?
I just think it's a big unknown. You know, you go into a grand jury and nothing could come of it, or something could come of it. I think the facts that happened with the Shauna Lawton mailer are concerning, but I don't think anyone really knows how high it goes. Mr. Mattiel has denied knowledge of it, and until we have...
Hard to, and I'm not trying to indict the speaker, hard to digest with the intimacy of a local election. We're talking about District 15. It's not a worldwide national election here. It's hard to digest the idea that he's not aware of what the folks that are working on his behalf are doing.
Yeah, but you're talking about a legal proceeding, and a lot of times it's not what you know, it's what you can prove, and I don't know what the grand jury has
Do you
before
expect him to be tentative in leadership if this thing is not resolved, or steady as we go?
I think he's steady. I think he has a group of solid Democratic support behind him for his leadership position. When he got reelected Speaker this past year, you had the 19 reformers, progressives, and the 9 Republicans who didn't support
You
him.
see no indication of nervousness as you're trying to work out this, say, independent study for gambling, correct?
No, we're not letting any of the machinations with any of this interfere with getting to the bottom of the IGT Twin River saga and getting the best deal for the state.
Appreciate your diligence. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan.
We should have another session on national politics. Final word when we come back. Stay with us. All right, so hearty conversation with the minority leader. Enjoy his company, no doubt. Have a great weekend. Monday, we will have Angelica Infante Green, the new education commissioner. I guess somewhere along the line we'll stop saying new, but the state takeover of the City of Providence schools is certainly new and now formal as of November 1st. Her expectations for it in that discussion Monday. You, again, have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in. Good